So in this video today, we're going to take an exclusive look into the mind of one of Australia's most senior abortionists, Dr. Alicia Broome. We're going to see how she justifies her trade and look at the mental gymnastics that she has to do just to turn up to work every day. I want you to watch this video till the end because the final thing that she admits is absolutely chilling and will shock you to the core.
COG's position on this bill is that it's both wholly unnecessary in addressing a problem that isn't actually relevant in the Queensland context with current practice.
Dr. Alicia Broome is from Logan Hospital, which is the very same hospital that the midwife who this inquiry heard from 2 hours earlier, Louise Adsett, is from. I mean, what are the chances that both Louise and Dr. Broome would be from the same hospital? Here we have Dr. Alicia Broome saying this bill that would give protection to babies who survive their abortion is completely unnecessary. It's out of step with current clinical practice in Queensland. Just 2 hours before, we heard from Louise Adsett, who said this.
Sadly, in the birth suite unit in my hospital, we have had babies born alive after terminations from 15 to 22 weeks. Born alive, gasping for air, moving and having a palpable heart rate, fighting for their lives. What I've directly witnessed or been told by my colleagues who have been present at the time, these babies were alive from anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes to 3 to 5 hours. Sometimes babies born alive after an abortion are put into witches' hats and are covered, taken out of the room and die while in that witch's hat. This is not an uncommon occurrence. Just recently, a mother decided to abort her baby at 19 weeks. The same misoprostol regime was started and this little baby was born alive again, moving, gasping for air and having a palpable heart rate.
One thing that's clear is these accounts don't add up. Both these women work in the same hospital. One of them is saying that babies are not born alive and left to die and that this is covered by current guidelines and legislation. And the other, the midwife who works on the ground, is saying that this is a live issue. She even references a case in the last few weeks of a baby born alive and left to die for 3.5 hours. It can't be that both of these women are correct. It has to be that one of these scenarios is true and the other isn't.
Comfort care, not resuscitation, is the standard of care for babies born under 22 weeks.
This doesn't square with the testimony from Louise Adsett, but it also doesn't square with the termination of pregnancy guidelines that Queensland has. These guidelines state that if a baby is born alive after their abortion, but they're unlikely to survive, then if parents do not wish to be involved in palliative care provision, healthcare providers may provide comfort support strategies. So this is a discretionary provision. It doesn't say that healthcare providers must provide comfort care strategies. It merely says may. So presumably under these very guidelines that Dr. Broome says are sufficient, a baby could be left to die on a metal kidney dish or in a witch's hat, as was the testimony of Louise Adsett, because there isn't a mandatory requirement. The example that they give of comfort care is to handle gently and carefully, wrap and cuddle, hold to provide warmth and comfort. But remember, if the parents don't want to do this, then it is up to the healthcare providers. And the Australian College of Midwives submission references the fact that this doesn't always happen and it can be very distressing for the midwives involved. Given that this is a discretionary provision and these babies are not counted as patients, they're not considered to be a patient for the purposes of staff to patient ratios. This means a midwife has to go above and beyond her normal duties, above and beyond the women that she's already caring for, the newborns that she's already looking after. And then she has to take care of this live-born baby who can survive for hours after their abortion. But it also doesn't provide for any kind of medication to be offered if the baby is in distress. A baby that is born alive between 15 to 22 weeks is considered to be pre-viable. From what I understand from speaking to neonatologists is that you can apply morphine to the baby's mouth. So in addition to wrapping them and holding them, you can apply morphine which will alleviate their distress. Midwives can't do that because it requires a medical script, it's an opioid. The fact that the guidelines don't even provide a right to medical care beyond a discretionary right to comfort care, that shows these guidelines are not sufficient.
Once a baby is born alive, they're covered by the Public Health Act.
It's all well and good for Dr. Alicia Broome to say, well, this is covered by existing legislation. That legislation has always existed and it has never covered or protected these babies at all. Think of baby Xantha in 2020, born at 19 weeks in the Queensland Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, dumped in an empty hospital room on a kidney dish for 7 minutes, alone to die. Now, she wasn't treated as a person under the law. The Public Health Act didn't protect her. Now, you could argue That's a problem of enforcement, that we should just be enforcing the Public Health Act more. We don't need to mandate an equal treatment provision for cancer patients or heart surgery patients, because the whole purpose of cancer treatment or heart surgery is not to kill the patient. It's to nurture the patient back to health or to alleviate their suffering. In complete contrast with abortion, the purpose is to kill the baby. If the baby survives the abortion, there does need to be a positive legal duty on the medical practitioners to make sure that child is cared for and treated with the dignity and humanity that they deserve, and in fact to be treated no differently to any other child in that hospital. And that's why South Australia and New South Wales have a positive legal duty embedded in the legislation. Dr. Alicia Broome says it's unnecessary because of the Public Health Act, but that's never protected these newborns. It didn't protect Xantha. In any Australian state or territory that's just relied on existing law to protect newborns who survive their abortion, it hasn't worked.
Scenarios envisioned by this bill previously are very emotive, but they're not based in Queensland experience. They're not feasible with current practice.
Nobody is asking Dr. Broome or anybody else to provide life-saving care to babies who are pre-viable. That's a myth that the abortion lobby has been perpetuating about these born alive bills. A born alive bill, like the one that's before the Queensland Parliament, just requires equal treatment. And so, you know, if I got pregnant and I went into labour prematurely at 18 weeks and I was rushed to hospital, the hospital wouldn't save my baby. All we're asking is for these newborn babies who survived their abortions, who are pre-viable, to be treated in exactly the same way as my wanted baby would be treated if they were born pre-22 weeks.
Scenarios envisioned by this bill previously are very emotive, but they're not based in Queensland experience.
This is inherently an emotive issue. You'd have to have a heart of stone to not be emotional about a situation where a newborn child is born alive and placed on a metal kidney dish to gasp for air and struggle to breathe without anyone to even hold them for hours. You know, like that is an inherently emotional situation. The fact that Dr. Broome tries to justify and rationalise this whole practice of leaving newborns to die after their abortion on the basis that these arguments are based in emotion is concerning to me. It shows a lack of empathy or humanity. It's disturbing, actually.
Large metropolitan hospitals are familiar with a comfort care approach for babies born under 22 weeks, but this isn't the case so much in rural and regional areas.
So this is the bit that really doesn't add up for me. On the one hand, Dr. Broome and Ranscog are saying, we don't need a born alive protection bill because we're already doing this. Nothing to see here. And then on the other hand, they're saying if this bill passes, it will reduce abortion access because regional and rural hospitals don't have the capacity to comply with the bill. You can't have it both ways. Either babies are not born alive and left to die, or they are. And if they're not born alive and left to die already, then this bill won't change anything because all it requires is for equal treatment for these babies. But I think what's actually happened is she's just let the cat out of the bag. She's said that in rural and regional hospitals, they don't have capacity to offer comfort care. They also don't necessarily have the expertise to do feticide after 22 weeks. What I take away from this is that in certain hospitals in Queensland, where there is limited capacity, babies are born pre-viable, pre-22 weeks, and they are being left to die because there just isn't the capacity to offer comfort care. And that even after that gestation of viability, after 22 weeks, because those hospitals don't have capacity for feticide, there are late-term abortions occurring where the babies are born alive and they are left to die. And what she's essentially acknowledging is if this bill passes, neither of those practices will be able to continue. To me, this just really exposes the lie. The fact that on the one hand, they're saying this doesn't happen. And then on the other hand, they're saying, but if it passes, it will erode abortion access. It doesn't add up.
There's no circumstance in which a clinician needs to make a decision at 21 weeks. Do we offer resuscitative measures or not? Because it's futile, unfortunately.
Interesting she says unfortunately. I mean, it's not futile, unfortunately, because this is actually what you intended. Dr. Broome's an abortionist. There's nothing unfortunate in a situation where you can't offer life-saving treatment to a child that you intended to kill.
Not once here has any of the witnesses attacked the abortion laws whatsoever. I haven't seen that. What I've seen is these people standing up for the rights of living souls that were the actual result of failed abortions.
So, as am I would remind the Member of Parliament that I also stand up for the rights of living souls, and that's what I do in my daily practice.
So this is a really interesting interaction, isn't it? Because it gets you into the mind of an abortionist. It gives you a glimpse into the twisted thinking. I mean, she says she stands up for the rights of living souls. That's what she does in her daily practice. Now, she does feticide. So let's take a look at what a feticide is. And I won't tell you what to think. I'll let you make up your own mind as to whether Dr. Broom stands up for the rights of living souls.
Why is it such a bad thing? Why would we consider strengthening a mandate to be able to look after a living soul after it's been born, damaged,
Let's go
give
to
it
the
that
question.
little bit of time and love as we do as humans, like even animals do for their actual, for their born. What's
These
the problem?
babies are humans and not animals.
These babies are human, they're not animals. What does the research actually say about these babies who survived their abortion and their experience? A study in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology that looked at 241 late-term abortions, over 50%, more than 1 in 2, survived their abortion because in those abortions feticide wasn't given. One baby survived in that study for up to 4 hours. The average survival time was 32 minutes. The most comprehensive study of live births following abortions was the Canadian study. It looked at over 13,000 abortions. In that study, there was various abortion methods and there was an 11% survival rate. Now, according to death certificates in that study, 10% of the babies who were born alive survived for over 3 hours. The average survival time was 110 minutes. So that's actually nearly 2 hours was the survival time. And there was a range of 1 minute to 1 day. So one baby in that study survived for 1 minute, but one newborn in that study actually survived for 24 hours. This study actually makes the point that there's increasing numbers of babies who are born alive after their abortion. It's clear that they can live for a very long time. Dr. Broom says she knows these babies are not animals, they're human babies. But it really does lead to a very legitimate question about whether we are in substance actually treating these babies as animals or worse than animals.
There will be some babies born in Queensland as a result of a termination of pregnancy at later gestation. They are very few, and they're those ones that I've specifically mentioned, babies with lethal fetal anomalies whose parents have chosen to end the pregnancy, but who want to meet their baby alive and have their baby die in their arms.
I actually think there's more going on here than this, and I don't think she can say this with such certainty that any baby after 22 weeks who has a life-threatening condition who is then induced alive dies in their parents' arms, because there's nothing to ensure that that is what occurs for those babies post 22 weeks. We have to recognise that these are babies that the parents intended to kill because they had some kind of disability. There's no requirement that the disability has to be life-threatening in the law. The baby can be killed up until birth for any reason. She's saying if feticide isn't used after 22 weeks, it's purely because the baby has a life-threatening condition, but we have to take her word for that. And she is the abortionist. She is the abortion industry. I'm not sure that I feel comfortable taking her word, given how, given the holes that exist within the rest of the evidence that she's given to the inquiry. We also actually do have Australian evidence from an unpublished coroner's report that I was given access to by a whistleblower. It's the case of a baby at Westmead Hospital. The coroner was Janet Stevenson, and in that situation, the parents went in to kill the baby because they'd received a diagnosis at 20 weeks that the baby had a heart defect. So they went in for the abortion, the baby was born alive, the parents cuddled the baby for about an hour, but then according to the coroner's report, the chain of custody was lost and this baby was found dumped in a medical waste bin many hours later while still alive and breathing. Coroner Janet Stevenson in that case says there was a total abrogation of responsibility for that child on behalf of the people who were meant to be taking care of that child. Here, Dr. Broom says with absolute certainty that babies after 22 weeks are not born alive and left to die. They remain in their parents' arms for hours until they pass. But she doesn't provide any proof of that. There's no actual legal obligation mandating that that occurs. So I do have very real concerns that we are entrusting the care of these newborns and the protection of their human rights to the very people who chose to kill them in the first place.
We should be really clear that babies born alive at these gestations, say 16 to 22 weeks, resulting from an abortion is not a failed abortion. It's not an unintended, unexpected consequence. We know that these babies will be born alive, but they're pre-viable. So this is existing practice. This is what happens with the current legislation.
Is the part that really shocked me to the core. The fact that she openly says, we intended this to happen. We intend to induce these babies alive, and we know they're not going to survive, but we don't care. I mean, they're pre-viable, we walk away. That's a shocking admission. It is something I've suspected for many, many years doing research in this space, but to hear her say point blank, induction is a method of abortion. These are not unintended live births, they're not failed abortions. It's a chilling admission, especially when you put it in this context. In the dairy industry, calving induction has been phased out since 2015 and banned by 2022. So these are little baby calves who were pre-viable, who because of the method of induction were being born alive. But even with little baby cows, we were not leaving them to die. The method that was considered more humane was to kill these calves with blunt force through a blow to the head to make sure that they weren't suffering and gasping for air. It was seen as even more cruel than a blow to the head to leave these calves to die. Yet that is the practice of abortion in Australia. One of the methods that we use is induction. It's to induce these babies, some of whom come out alive. Dr. Broom admits that this is an intended consequence, and yet in baby cows, this is illegal. In fact, the Australian dairy industry took it upon itself to phase out calving induction because of the community outcry and because of the welfare concerns. Here, the abortion industry, instead of doing what the dairy industry did, which is owning up to the issue, the abortion industry is covering it up, it's pretending that it's not happening. The same Queensland government who says that if parents do not wish to be involved in palliative care provision, healthcare providers may provide comfort care strategies, says that there should be humane killing of unwanted calves and that farmers have an obligation to ensure that the killing method used is humane and performed as soon as possible after birth. Calves must be handled calmly and quietly and not subjected to unnecessary distress, fear or pain. Why is it mandatory to not let baby calves gasp for air for hours and to experience distress, and yet it's entirely legal to do that to newborn Queensland children?